Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Alexia, and I am the event and project manager of the Microsoft Reactor Toronto. I will be sharing session resources with you in the chat. But before we begin, I'd like to quickly review two items with you, our code of conduct and event guidelines. First, please take a moment to review our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We do encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, our event guidelines. This session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I will be sharing the link to our YouTube channel in the chat. And if you've not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please note that you must create an account in order to access or interact in the chat. You can set that up now, and if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us on social media or on Meetup. Which brings us to today's session. I'm going to bring in our speaker here, Rishab, live from the Toronto Reactor. How are you doing today?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing good.
Fantastic. We're so glad to have you here in the Toronto Reactor.
The mic is on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, take it away.
Sure. So today we'll be building a resume API utilizing Azure Functions. So you can utilize this to apply jobs. And I did it. I was only able to impress just one developer after creating this project. And they were like, oh, this is cool. Like I can, send a GET request and get details about Rishab, who he is, and all of the details that you typically put in a resume. So a bit about me. I'm a developer evangelist here at Twilio now, and I live in Kitchener. And you can find me online on Twitter, GitHub, and my email too. And a bit of a backstory about this project. So this was part of the serverless September event that Microsoft was doing, I think, in 2020. And I didn't know how Azure Functions worked, so did some modules on Microsoft Learn and came up with the idea of building a resume API. As we all kind of know in the cloud community that there's the Cloud Resume Challenge by Forest. So it was kind of a similar take, not AWS, but on Azure. But you don't have any front end or anything. You just have a serverless API that you can call to get your resume details. So moving on to the tech stack that we would be using, it's going to be JavaScript and Azure Functions. And then there are some tools that will be needed during this demo. So Azure CLI, Azure Functions CLI, and we also need the JSON resume schema, which we can get from the jasonresume.org. So let's get started with our project here. So I'll make this big so that you can read it. Come on. Okay. So we'll start with the Azure Functions CLI that I already have installed, and we'll initialize a project. So we'll do, let me make sure I'm in an empty directory first. Okay, so let's do func, which stands for function, and then we just initialize with, goes with init. And we name our directory resume API. And as I said, we'll be using JavaScript for this session. So we'll have JavaScript at the end. So this will generate a directory with all the necessary files you need for a function app. We still have to create a function itself, which would be listening to the HTTP trigger. Because whenever someone on the internet makes a GET request, we need to respond with our JSON templated resume. So that's why it'll be a HTTP trigger. So let's create that with function. Before we do that, I have to change my directory to the function app.
ask, Ivan, can you make the font a little bigger?
Sure. Let's see. Is it readable on the stream?
I think that's good enough.
Okay. Yeah, do let us know in the chat if you can't read the text on my CLI. So we are in the right directory now, and we'll create the.
And again, I am the boss of the audience. We have Ozzy online asking questions around that. If you're going, asking the question if you're going to answer a question online or at the end.
Oh, well, if they have any questions in regards to what I'm doing right now, feel free to jump in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as we code this.
Yeah, and just to give you feedback, we have a lot of people sharing, saying thumbs up and clapping. So
Awesome. So we'll create the function. So function new, and then we'll name it resume because it seems appropriate. And then, as I said, we'll be using the template to be the HTTP trigger, only if you can spell template. So HTTP trigger, and then we'll hit enter. And then, as you can see, it did create a resume folder. If we do ls-l, you can see there is a directory called resume, which would hold our code for the JavaScript function, and also a file called function.json, which would have the configuration on how to execute the function, if it's listening to get, post, other kind of requests. So moving along, let me open my Visual Code. Just bear with me. Okay. Oops. Come on. Okay, finally. So make this bigger, and also make the. Okay. And open. So we had it in GitHub, and then resume API. We'll open that.
Sorry about another question online. They're asking if the first time here, FUNC doesn't work on my terminal. What do I need to install?
You need to install the Azure Functions CLI. So if they go to docs.microsoft.com, or if you just do a quick, Bing Google search of Azure Functions CLI, you should be able to install it. Keep it in mind, we will also need the Azure CLI, which we'll be using after we have developed our code here. So while you are installing the Function CLI, also install the Azure CLI because we will need it later in the demo. Okay, so let's start with our index.js. So if we go into the resume folder, which is our functions folder, you can see it has the boilerplate code that is provided by Azure, where you send a GET request, you get this message saying hello. If you pass in an argument saying my name is whatever, you'll get the name in the response too, and it also says this is a HTTP triggered function executed successfully, and then also logs a message at the top. So what we are going to do is we'll remove all of this because we don't need it. We just need our JSON resume, which if we go back to the slides, you can see I did say that we'll be using JSON resume.org to create our template. And it looks like this. So this is a really basic info about me. I didn't want to include a lot of details, just for the purpose of this demo. But if we go to the actual site, if you click at schema, you can see you can just copy and paste this and add your own details onto this, which will give you a cool, JSON formatted resume about your own skills and abilities. So this is what I have been using in the demo, but you can see the details are not as much. So we'll copy this. Oops. It's already working. So we'll copy this and paste it here. So JSON data is where our information is being stored in, as you can guess, the JSON format. We also need to change the response. So we want to respond by the JSON data that's being held on the top. So let's change that real quick here. Okay. So we are stringifying the JSON data, which is just another term for beautifully displaying the data that's in the JSON format. So now if we save this and go back to our terminal, and if we do function start, which would start our Azure function locally, we should get a URL that we can access to see what's going on. So you can see it responds with whatever we had in that JSON data. So now you have a working API that can be called, not through the internet because this is still local. We'll need resources in Azure to deploy this, but a working Azure function that can be called locally with a GET request. You can also test this by doing a GET request through Postman, or also a curl request in your terminal to localhost:7071, because that is the default port that Azure uses in the functions. So now let's go back to our terminal and deploy some resources in Azure. And we'll stop our process here. I have to make it a bit smaller because there is some text at the bottom. Okay. So we'll need a resource group, which is the first resource that we will put our resources in. And then we'll need a storage account and also a functions app where we will deploy all this code that we just wrote, and so that it's available on Azure and can be called via the internet. That reminds me, the default setting in Azure Functions on when you do get post or any other request is to have the authentication level is set to the function itself. So you want to make that anonymous so that anybody can, call your resume API. So let's do that before we deploy any code to Azure. So if you go to functions.json, you can see auth level is set to function. We'll just go ahead and delete that and type. So you can see it automatically completes it. And as I told in the beginning, functions.json is where the configuration exists for the Azure function. So we'll save that, and now we can go back and deploy resources to Azure. So now is when you'll need the Azure CLI. Earlier we utilized the functions CLI, and now we'll utilize the Azure CLI to deploy our resources. So as I said, the first thing is AZ. So we need a resource group. So you would go AZ group create, pretty simple, and then you'll name it So since it's a resume API, let's name that resume API demo-RG. RG just stands for resource groups. It's just a good naming practice. And then we want to choose a location. So we'll go with East US, which I think is the closest to us. And if we hit enter, this should create a AZ resource group or an Azure resource group. Keep in mind, you would have, if you have recently installed the Azure CLI, you would have to log in by doing AZ login. And only after that you could deploy resources to your account. So we have the resource group. The next thing I said we need is the storage account. And the other way to do this is through the UI. So you could create, a resource group, a function app, storage account through the UI, and then just run the function publish command on your CLI to publish all those things. But I prefer CLI over the UI because it's easy, right? So the storage account, the name needs to be unique. So let's come up with something unique and hope it's not taken. Let's see if resume API demo 07 is available. And then location, again, same as we used for our resource group, East US. And then you also need to specify the resource group. So where this resource would exist, which is the one we created on top. Resource, resume API demo-RG. And then we'll be using nothing fancy, but a standard LRS for the SKU. You can read more about it on Microsoft Learn, on different tiers that are available for a storage account and different type of redundancy that's available. So this looks good. This should create our storage account only if the name is available. And we'll wait while it's doing its magic and creating that resource for us. Okay, so I did create the storage account. And you can see, all these URLs that are available for blob, DFS file. Now we'll create the function app itself. So again, we'll use the AZ CLI. So AZ function app, and then we'll create. So the resource group we'll have to specify that every time because that you want to specify where this resource should reside. So resource-group. What did we name it? It's easier if you store these as variables in your command line because you have to go up and see if you're naming it right. So resume API demo. Resume API demo-RG. And then the next thing is the consumption plan. And then the location for the consumption plan location would be East US, right? And then we also have to specify the runtime details. So for us, it would be node. And then you also have to specify runtime version. I believe I have node 16 running, and Azure Functions now supports node version 14 and 16. So we'll go with 16 here. You also have to specify the Azure Functions version. So let me make this smaller as our text is going the other way. Okay. Still not enough. room. Oh my God. Okay, there we go. So function, then version. We want it to be the latest, so we'll go with 4. And then we also have to name our function app. So name it something in regards to resume API. Let's make it a bit personal with Rishab. So resume API Rishab. And then last but not least, the storage account that we created. So storage-account. And we named it resume API demo 07. So resume API demo 07. Hopefully, all of our arguments are right, and I can already see a typo in the consumption plan. Other than that, I think everything looks fine. So consumption. Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay, so we have some errors. AZ function app create, consumption plan location, and then name, resource group, runtime. Okay, let's rerun the command with checking what we did wrong. So the function version is what it's complaining about. And I believe I just might be missing an S. Let's try functions. I think we got it right this time. Maybe. But yeah.
That's with your feedback.
Sure.
A couple of people saying, hi, this is super cool. I am going to ask if we can do the same from the portal or VS Code. You already mentioned that you like CLI.
Mm-hmm.
So give me some time while it's working.
Yes. Yeah, I think the portal is not this boring because you can see it live deploying stuff, whereas on the CLI it just takes a little bit of time before anything populates. But you can see we have our function app created and deployed in Azure, but it doesn't have the code that we wrote locally. So we'll do that now with the function publish, and you specify the app name, right? So now it will be using the function CLI instead of the Azure CLI. So you go func Azure, and then function app, and then you just say publish, and whatever the app name was. So again, variables work great. So I would highly recommend creating them. So we named this as resume API Rishab. So let's go with that. So now it's doing its magic and would publish the function app that we created locally to be available in Azure and have a URL for us, which we can access or do a GET request to, giving us the JSON data that we need for our resume. Okay, so you can see it did give us an invoke URL. So if we copy that, oops, let's try that again. And paste it in our browser window. We should invoke or should do a GET request, and you can see the function responds with the data that we have in the JSON format. So this gives you the resume API serverless technologies being used here with Azure Functions. And now you can, I don't know if you will be able to utilize this, but I did apply to a few jobs just provided them with the URL. There were a few developers that were like, oh, this caught our eye. This is impressive what you did. But yeah, we have a working API, and you can also consume this in your front end. I know one of my friends, Alf, was doing a project where they were consuming my Azure Functions API and we're creating a front-end website, which is also a cool idea. So this would act as your backend, and every time you make a GET request, it will populate the data for you. So yeah, that is today's demo. Now we'll open it up for questions if we have any in the chat.
I will take a look at the chat and provide the questions. Hey, for me, it's super cool because I hope my microphone is working. We did, just in context for the people, we did the last minute layout change here in the reactor. So I hope the experience is fine. But hey, to be honest with you, I don't do a lot of CLI. I am most user interface person, so I go to code, press F5 to debug and run locally, go to the command palette and publish from there. But it's super nice when I saw the CLI step by step, because you can really see what you need to do. You need to create a resource group, then you need to have a storage, then you need to have a function. So you really understand which are the elements that you need to run this. So I really, really like it. And I also like it how easy it is. It's not very complicated. Of course, when you see this, when someone who knows, it seems easier, but literally in 10 minutes, you can create this and you have the basis to do more and more. So hey, kudos here. Again, if someone has a question, we are going to be around for a little more questions. I really, really like it. And I also like it how, as I said, how doing the CLI, I completely understand that sometimes pressing the button is fine, but it's some kind of magic. Now we can understand what's happening. I can understand what's happening in the back. But I also am not a very good typer, so I'm going to do a lot of typos.
Yes, we saw that live, and yeah, no, I agree. When you do it in the portal, I believe you just go into functions and you click, few check marks, and it deploys the resource group for you. It does the storage account for you, so you don't know what all resources go behind when you're creating one. With the CLI, you need to have those resources prior to being able to deploy the function, which is, I guess, a good kind of gives you a background of what all you need.
Perfect. I don't see any questions, so I will plug ourselves in super quickly to invite everyone to, let me move to the next slide, if you have some seconds, I just share a link. We are going to share a link for a survey that we have with the event code. So please let us know what topics do you want us to do in the future. What do you like? What you didn't like? What can we do better here? And also, if you want to join and be aware of the activities that we are doing, this is the links for the global YouTube channel that we have, where you can find this in 24, 48 hours, usually a couple of days. It's going to be published there. Our Twitter account, the meetups group. Hey, we are here to help. And thanks a lot. Thanks everybody who was online. This was a super fast and amazing one. I am looking forward to start. I am promised to try to use more the CLI. More and more. This day I'm playing with Bicep, which is kind of a structure as a code. So I was trying to figure out how to do this while you were doing in a Bicep file to create all of the stuff there. But this was super nice, super fun. And hey, I love that we have a couple of Angry Birds. Happy birthday. Celebrating that we have a working resume function. So thanks a lot. And see you next one, everyone.